where they need to be fast. That's our time and resource in investing in the market which you're putting your cash. Our other investment from the Here East point of view, away from commercial real estate, is the future talent. And we're passionate about making sure that the young people growing up today really understand what it means to work in these sectors that we've built here at Here East, and we've curated and brought them in. So ChatGPT is a brilliant example that we're looking at AI, and actually, let's not fear it. Yes, there's discussions about regulation. Yes, there's discussions about what it could do. Let's teach the children how to use it. We teach them how to use your calculator. We don't ask them to do long division in their heads too much. Let's teach them to work out how to extract value from these new tools which are being put in front of them. Because if we don't, other nations are. And if we want to maintain our competitive advantage, which I strongly believe we have, then we need to make sure that we teach our children well of the value of these new tools which are out there and not fear them. And that's about knowledge, education, and understanding. It builds on my final point, which is we've been on a journey with new sectors and new technologies. We've been there looking at what is the metaverse is all about, and there's the naysayers. My business partner is somewhat of a naysayer down here as well. But we just don't know what this is going to unlock for us in the future. We've put a whole load of use cases as a commercial real estate developer and operator. We've run workshops, we've worked with GTA Metaverse, we've had Russ and the team bring people here, we've had discussions starting way back. We've commissioned the build of our own digital twin, not an engineering digital twin which had been around for decades, but in an Unreal Engine games engine, which you'll be able to explore, walk around and see what goes on at Here East. Because we want to explore it and see how can we unlock value. Because back to that talent piece, our investment into the future talent is this is the systems, these are the devices that they'll use, and this is where they will identify and extract value of the future. And what Russ has kindly said, we did our events here, we went to South by Southwest, we took it by storm, we did a brilliant event in GB House, we had over 100 people in, we've summarised all of our findings and report that Russ is kindly going to put through the TLA and the GTA websites, put it on circular there. So our vision for the future is more growth, more investment into the human resource for the future supply chain and talent pipeline, which enables you to make sure your investment is quite rightly served and grown by the new businesses that we see. Thank you very much.
Gavin, thank you so much. It really is incredible to see what you've achieved here, and Andrew too. Thank you for that. So let's get to some of the big issues that we want to talk about today. And we know that data is one of our most powerful tools. It shapes how and what we do. But what does it tell us about the investment landscape of today's tech world? So the man with the insight is Henry Hallwood. He is head of research at the consultancy Bowhurst, that is today's event partner. So to look at the key trends in the investment landscape so far this year, please welcome Henry.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to see so many familiar faces in the audience today. I'm going to talk to you today about what our data says about the latest trends in investment into UK tech, startups, and scale-ups. I've got 8 slides and 5 minutes, so please forgive me if I go at a bit of a clip. But before I tell you about the latest trends, I can tell you a little bit about Bowhurst, just so you can understand where our data comes from. Bowhurst is a data platform tracking the UK's economy. We have data on all 5.2 million active companies in the UK. But we focus in on those companies raising equity investment. So we look at every company in the UK that's raised any amount of equity investment. That means since we started in 2011, we've tracked nearly 70,000 investments, worth nearly £150 billion to the companies involved. But the median deal size that we're tracking is around £250,000. We look at absolutely everything, friends and family onwards. So that sort of data set of 70,000 investments is what we've analyzed and what I'm going to talk to you about today. Without further ado, the bad news. So it won't come as any surprise to anyone that, to use a euphemism, fundraising conditions have tightened. This graph shows it quite aggressively. Obviously, this is showing by years. So that drop off to the right is obviously because there's only a quarter in terms of the data to 2023. But you can see 2022 was down on 2021, and I think it's fair to say at this point that 2023 will also be down on 2022 levels. The sort of question is, are we going to see it come up to the levels we were seeing in 2019 and 2020? The reason I'm sort of confident saying that 2023 is going to be a harder year than the previous 2 years is if you look at the quarterly picture, you see a lot of the drop in 2022 was concentrated in the last 2 quarters, and you can see that drop continuing as well into the first quarter of this year. I'm not naturally a pessimist, so when I'm showing this number for the first quarter of 2023, it's 861 deals. That is still an enormous number of deals being done, but we do have to go back to sort of 2016, 2017 levels to see similar quarterly volumes. So it's definitely true that it has got harder to raise investment from investors. You'll have heard and read about a lot of the coverage of seeing the mega deals go away from the ecosystem. They're the most noticeable ones. You go back 12, 18 months, it seemed like every day someone was announcing a $50 million raise. What I want to flag with this slide is that it's at all stages that we are seeing this slowdown. So this graph is showing you in the yellow line the number of new companies raising their first round of external investment. And you can see actually it peaked way back in 2019 with just shy of 2,000 new companies a year raising money. Last year, that has fallen to 1,400. So it's quite a low level. Again, you have to go back to 2014 to be at those levels. But in absolute terms, 1,400 companies is still a large number of companies. So it's got harder, but lots of companies are still raising. That's it for the bad news. Like I say, you can, whether you're a glass half full or glass half empty kind of person, will probably dictate how you interpret this graph anyway. On to the good news. This is looking at the top tech sectors for investment over the past 12 months. So starting second quarter 2022. Going forward to the end of the most recent quarter that finished. You can see at the top, AI receiving the most deals. By AI, we mean something very specific. This is where companies are working on a product or technology that directly integrates AI. With the rise of things like ChatGPT, we're probably going to have to come up with some new classifications around sort of primary versus secondary use of AI, but nonetheless, it's here at the top. And what's interesting is it used to be, for the past sort of 18, 24 months prior to this, that fintech and AI would, fintech would be in the top spot and AI would be in number second. I said this was good news. I think for me, the real good news in here is that clean tech number. They're in third place. We've seen clean tech really climb up this ranking quite a lot over the past 24 months. So with all of the effort and energy and supposed resources going into clean tech, we're finally seeing that follow through in terms of investments into early stage startup technologies as well. And then my final slide, and I put this on to try and talk about the overall ecosystem. So all those numbers are about the most recent investment volumes. This is everything we've ever seen raise equity investment in the UK. And although the dead bit there does stand out, I think that is really good news and something quite impressive. It's less than 1 in 5 of those businesses, and this is since we started in 2011, less than 1 in 5 of those businesses has died. 1 in 10 has had a successful exit. It's really quite stark figures and goes against some of the conventional wisdom that lies behind sort of theorizing about the power law in venture investing. You could start to make some interesting distinctions between the US and UK ecosystems. That might be a bit in depth for this, but come grab me afterwards because I've got some rants about that that I will happily share with anyone who will listen. And to end on an optimistic note, that 35% seed companies, these are companies working on lots of different technologies. As I mentioned, the clean tech ones in there get me really excited for the solutions that are going to come to market in the next 2, 3, 5 years. So I think despite the difficulty in fundraising at the moment, the ecosystem is faring really, really well. We'll be keeping a close eye on that number of deaths, and that number of zombies is again, lower than some of the sort of public commentary might lead you to expect. So I think the tech ecosystem overall is pretty robust. So if the conditions stay tight, they look to be in a good place to weather the storm. Thank you. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. If it wasn't enough for you, some of my colleagues are in the room, so you can grab them during the break as well. I'm going to hand back to Ben, but you'll also get a bit more from me on the panel. Thanks very much.
Henry, thank you. Yeah, please do grab a seat because you're going to take part in this first panel of today. Some really interesting insights there when you see it's laid out quite so starkly. So let's get to our first discussion. We're going to look at some of those issues that were raised by Henry, especially in those images. And we'll look at the tech downturn, how investors are reevaluating tech investment. So joining Henry on the panel is Irene Graham, who is Chief Executive of the Scale Up Institute, Neil Shah, Director and Tech Sector Specialist at the London Stock Exchange Group, Eric Collins, Chief Executive and co-founder of the VC firm Impact X, and moderating the panel, delighted to welcome Bindi Carrier, Venture Partner at Molten Ventures and a member of the TLA and GTA Advisory Board. Welcome to you all.
So, good morning, everyone. How is everyone today? Yeah? Let's get that energy. Keep it going. Come on. I want a louder yell for you. Come on. Yeah, there we go. So this is a little bit of a somber but interesting and hopeful panel. We're talking about job cuts, chip shortages, reduction in e-commerce demand, flat rounds or down rounds. People are actually celebrating that they're getting flat rounds and not down rounds. We've seen the stark drop in venture capital investment. I mean, the data really speaks for itself. And I was saying to Eric back there, I'm like 17% dead and 3.4% zombies. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting to see. And personally, I don't think this is the end. I think we have a lot more to come. And, we look at also the collapse of SVB last month, the mini bank crisis, and actually how that's impacted stocks all around, not just in our sector, but actually even in retail, automotive. There's a lot of, people being quite cautious right now. So with that kind of background, we've got the most amazing panel. If it's all right, I can get each of you to just do a quick 30-second intro to yourself. Henry, we know who you are, so I'm going to skip you because we just had a lovely 5 minutes from you. But Neil, Irene, Eric, just a quick 30-second intro to who you are.
Thanks, Minnie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Shah. I look after the tech sector at the London Stock Exchange. What I'm trying to do is help entrepreneurs have optionality. I think we've got a fantastic tech sector here. You can IPO at all sizes, from £6 million, as PensionBee did, up to Wise, £420 million. IPOs are happening. We've had 11 year to date, and there's more to come.
Thanks, Neil. Irene.
That was a good advert there, Neil.
Yeah.
That was very quick. Jeffy. Irene Graham, co-founder of the Scale Up Institute, set up as a not-for-profit to actually address the UK's issue of being great at startups but not so good at scaling up. A former financier in banking, and I set things up like the Business Growth Fund and Open Banking back in that time.
Thank you. Eric.
And Eric Collins. I helped to found an organization called Impact X. We invest in underrepresented entrepreneurs in Europe and the UK, meaning places where there are inefficiencies in the market, women and people of color are not invested in it, numbers that relate to their demographics, and we believe that's a great inefficiency, and therefore we invest very much there. I was also on the board of Tech Nation until we recently disbanded, so it's good seeing you all.
And I see a big pile of your books back there, Eric.
Yeah,
Okay.
Penguin Random House wants me to
Yeah.
say this, so
Yeah.
go back there and do something
Absolutely.
with those
So we'll
books.
get your
Thank you.
autograph in all those books later, correct? Okay, I had to do that open ad for you. So I'm going to age a few of us on this panel, and I'm including myself. This is not the first tech downturn we've experienced. And arguably, I would say 2008 was easy for our sector. We've actually never seen a downturn like this. Those of us that were around in the bloodbath of 2000 have seen a nuclear winter like no other. I was in PwC back then, and we had a tech accelerator, and very quickly I was on the street as a dot-com kid because PwC's like, we don't do that anymore. And then they didn't come into tech for a very, very long time afterwards. I kind of want to get your view, Eric and Irene, because you were both around in 2000 and you both experienced that downturn. What is it like now, and what are you seeing now compared to the last two downturns? And if we get a bit of time, Neil, you were a banker in 2008, so you had a really rough time back then. So, we want to hear, what was it like? And do you think we're similar now? So, Irene, I'm going to start with you, then Eric, then Neil.
So I've had the tech downturn and the global financial crisis as tsunamis. Look, I think I'm going to actually focus now on what we have, and I think Gavin and Russ, you touched on it. If you look back in the early 2000s, we didn't have the ecosystem of support that we have now. There are so many centres like Plexel, Bradbraham in Cambridge, Audley Park in Manchester, Scale Space in Imperial, Crickson, that are actually places where we are looking to bring the ecosystem together to help our tech grow and start and grow. And I think we've got to look at that. That ecosystem has developed. The Scale Up Institute didn't exist back then. And I think that ecosystem is working really closely together in what we're trying to address. If you look at then the funding dynamics, the reality is we have far more funding initiatives and scale of funding than we did back in the early 2000s. We have a vibrant angel community. We have a growing VC community. We have entities like the British Business Bank, Innovate UK, that did not exist then to address the gap we have, and the gap we have honestly had for multiple decades of patient capital. And that is something that there's been a journey of. So I think there's more patient capital, despite, I agree, the tightening. What we've got to do now is really accelerate the big issue the UK has compared to its international competitors. And that is that institutional money is not coming in as patient capital to our startup and growth economy. We have to address that. I think Neil will talk about the capital markets infrastructure that's happening, task force around how do we unleash some of that patient capital through. And it's vital that the initiatives under the Edinburgh reforms that the government's now focused on to unlock pension and insurance monies actually happens at pace.
Okay.
So those are opportunities, and those are things that we've got a better ecosystem, more funding, but that institutional capital is what we've got to address.
Some very, very fantastic points, and I can definitely echo your views on the ecosystem. Just even when we launched the startup business at Microsoft in 2007, 2012 onwards, we saw all of this happening. So I agree, we've got much more of a fundamental and a base than we did in the last two recessions. Eric, what are you thinking?
So, I think I'm being called old when I'm talking about business cycles, and I've been around for a number of business cycles.
Well, we're similar age.
But in 2000, I was in Boston, Massachusetts. So, and in that particular point, we were sort of the epicenter. There was an organization called CMGI that was sort of taking all the oxygen in the room and really doing a lot of investing. They actually did something like FTX. They actually underwrote the Celtics home, which was the Fleet Center. It became the CMGI Center. None of us know about CMGI now. It's just gone. So what I experienced then was that there were not sort of the options that we do have now. So I agree with Irene, quite frankly. There are a lot more options. There's a bit more sophistication about the market, given that we've gone through other economic downturns and we've seen these cycles and we've seen what can happen after a downturn, the opportunity for growth, the opportunity to actually have unprecedented value acquisition and creation within the technology sector. That all happened. So I do see that. The thing which I also see, though, is that even with all of the growth that actually has occurred, when we're looking at our portfolio, and ImpactX has about 25 companies in its portfolio, our portfolio companies are looking to the United States. They are not finding in the UK the sort of movement quickly toward, we understand we're balancing out the risk, we're thinking about what the upside could be, and we're going to therefore move relatively quickly to be able to support these businesses and to be able to get in maybe at very favorable valuations. We're not necessarily seeing that. We're seeing many of our organizations going to the United States for their fundraising and finding that there's a bit more appetite there.
Yeah.
So that seems to me to be a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So actually, I'm going to merge the next question into one. Neil, you can answer sort of both.
Sure.
And then I'll bring Henry on this. Do you think this current downturn is the so-called new normal, or is it a temporary blip, and when do you see it bouncing back? So your stock exchange hat, 2008, now, blip, and then Henry, maybe talk a little bit more deeper to the data you displayed before this panel.
Sure. So let's just wind back to 2001, right? There were probably 3 tech companies in the S&P. Cisco, Intel, Microsoft. We've come a long way since then. Even in the UK, 40 plus unicorns right now. It's not as depressing as some of the data makes out. Q1 was tough, but just in the last few weeks, we've seen a number of tech IPOs. We had a US software company list a couple of weeks ago, $40 million of revenue. There's more coming down the pipe. Things are happening. Quantexa raised $129 million in their Series E round from GIC. What I'd love to do is have more institutions in the UK that can do the sort of thing that GIC do to provide entrepreneurs with optionality. This is some of the work we're doing at the stock exchange in terms of we've had a great Hill review, Khalifa review, but what are all the other things we need to fix? Pensions capital, remuneration. How can we help these companies not only start and scale here, but grow and stay here too? So we'll be doing more of that.
So IPOs back in 2023?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Q4, huh?
Yeah. No, even before that, Irene.
VCs like this.
Wow. Yeah,
As someone who works for a growth VC, we like this comment. I'm going to hold you to that, Neil. Henry, do you want to go a little bit deeper into
and Neil's space is the growth stage, IPO stage. If I go all the way back to the beginning, the sort of supply of new businesses with that slide that I was talking about, showing that had fallen quite a lot. To your question about whether it has to remain, whether this is the new normal, most of those deals are done by angels or SEIS funds. With angels, it's discretionary investing. Those people do still have, some in the room, do still have the capital to carry on investing. So it is about making sure that the companies can survive long enough to find the capital, but it's about building back the confidence. I think angels can get back to that place. As an asset, when you're investing as an angel, your horizon is 10 years hence.
Yeah.
So however bad things look in the macro now, you've got to be pretty pessimistic to not think that company can make you decent returns for 10 years' time.
Yeah. Okay, very, very good point. I think from a macro VC perspective, and what I've been observing with my other hat on, is I just think a lot of VC funds were being cautious in Q1 this year. So they came back beginning of January and they're like, let's preserve our capital. Let's preserve what we deploy and let's focus our capital on our portfolio and let's make sure our portfolio survives this, has 12, 18, 24 months cash, and let's get them focusing on the fundamentals. So I think that's what I've seen happening in a lot of Q1 and part of the Q2 upcoming. But then I do think capital will start to, release. Since Irene and myself were having this discussion just before the panel. So I do think that is going to happen. So with that in mind, if these conditions are going to last for a little bit longer, and Eric and Irene, with both your investor hats on, how are founders and investors meant to navigate this? Give some advice to those in the audience and those on the YouTube channel. So Eric, I'll start with you and then over to you, Ivy.
So one of the things that we have been doing, we recently announced a partnership with Microsoft with the ImpactX Venture Studio. And the reason we're doing this is because one of the things we're trying to test is whether or not we can get organizations that are underrepresented and entrepreneurs that are underrepresented to get over, we already have a problem in terms of venture capital. The amount of money that goes, if you have a demographic distinction from a white male and you're a white woman, you're a black man, you're a black woman, the amount of venture capital you have is minuscule, right? You have, if you're a white woman here in the UK, it's less than 3% of venture capital has gone to you over the last 10 years. If you're a black person, it's 0.24%. If you're a black woman, 0.0. You know, just keep on adding zeros after the decimal point and you find out how much we've given.
So
those are areas that are generally not necessarily available. So the question is, can we actually look to, and it's, you know, and I challenge this room, are you doing something about that? Are you looking at this inefficiency and you're trying to address it? You all decide how you're going to address that. The thing that I'm most concerned with is whether or not, and what we're doing with Microsoft is, can we actually then deal with the revenue side? If we can't deal with the investment side because people have whatever biases or whatever they're doing there, we're going to deal with the revenue side. So how do we actually create the products that can actually address the needs and make sure that what we're doing is then having those people, when they come out for their next round, have a very robust pipeline and proof of concept that is instantiated through the presence of revenue and coming revenue from tier 1 customers. And so Microsoft allows us to have access to those.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're talking about as a strategy to combat the dynamics which exist, and then the future proofing some of this, and in fact, hopefully building stronger companies anyway, that have good business models, have good pipelines, have good customer bases, and that does a whole different series of things for these sort of organizations.
And I think that goes for not only the earlier stage companies, but also growth stage, which is you've got your revenue, make sure you keep those customers sticky, and win, land and expand, and also win new customer base, which is where we think out in the growth stage. Scale Up Institute, what are you thinking?
So I think, look, I mean, customer and cash is always king.
Yep.
What will kill you is not having cash in the bank, and we've seen that multiple times, even in the financial services sector. So that is absolutely critical. I think from a business point of view, this is the time, as many of you who are running businesses here, to be out in the market talking to the investors. You do need to connect to the investor base. You do need to keep those relationships up and join as well your peers. There are many entities that provide peer networks for you to meet with your other peers as you're going through some of the decisions and issues that you might be facing as a scale-up company. And I think that is really important, that you're out in the marketplace, in the networking with investors, with your peers, and actually being very realistic and resilient and making sure you're looking after your own well-being. So that's some of the things from the business side. And there's a lot more opportunity to also connect to sector specialists. Yeah. Eric, you've just talked about that. I know Sony Music is setting up something with the Digital Catapult, looking at our music industry. So we've got a lot more sector initiatives and opportunities as well, and a lot of support coming from our different finance players. On the investor side, to your point, Eric, if you're not signed up to the Women in Investing Code or not engaged in working with some of the great players like Eric on how we actually bridge into our diverse community, then there's something you need to ask yourself about your own investor model. And I think the other thing, and it picks up the earlier point, your point, Eric, about the US, our knowledge, our institutional players' knowledge of our growth economy is not great here. And we need to expand that knowledge. So all of you that are currently investing in our startup and scale-up economy, we all have a role to help our institutional investors understand the opportunity. And that's something we're certainly focused on, and with Russ, on how do we broker that information, because actually we still don't have an institutional investor base that really understands the great growth economy we have here and the opportunity.
Great, thank you for that. And, as a woman of Indian background in a certain age bracket, I just so agree with what both of you have said. Looking at the whole concept of early stage versus growth stage in this climate, Henry, you're going to be sitting on a lot of data around the experience of the current economic climate. And I sit on the board of an earlier stage entrepreneur organization called ICE, and we are starting to see companies really coming down to the line and making that fundamental decision whether to go or no go. And I'm seeing it anecdotally a fair amount. So I'd like to get some insights into that. And Neil, you're as late stage as it gets, right? IPO, London Stock Exchange. So just anecdotally, what are you both seeing in early versus late? So Henry, I'll start with you and then Neil.
Yes, certainly. So I think the interesting thing here, and perhaps what may have been missing from one of my slides, was to talk about valuations. That's where a lot of the go, no-go hinges on. The reason I don't have a slide on it is, although we do have data on the sort of actual pre-money and post-monies for every deal, we're finding that the deal terms are getting a bit more exotic in each, in some of the rounds we're seeing. So there's a term in the market at the moment, Urino, which means up round in name only.
Did you catch that? Up round in name only, Urino.
So you allot one share, and the post money of that is higher than your last post money. But there's some preference shares, sometimes quite aggressive preference shares being allotted in the round too. Which makes the sort of holistic valuation quite hard to calculate. That is a symptom of the times we are in. Investors are aware of the pressure on the investees to carry on telling that growth story. You're a growth company, you need to be showing the story up and up and up, but investors are aware of the fact that they've got a bit more power in the dynamic than they did 18 months ago.
But as I mentioned earlier, what we're seeing now is people are just relieved if it's a flat round or like slightly up, as opposed to a proper down round and a complete reset.
And convertibles and other types of rounds
it's
are
getting
also
much more creative right
proliferating.
now, right? But again, some of the best companies will be founded in this time. We all know that in this kind of downturn. Neil, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so two things, Mindy. Your CEO put up a great slide during your Investor Day of all the companies founded in the down rounds, in the downturn, right? Instagram, WhatsApp, Trustpilot, Airbnb,
Google,
Slack.
Microsoft.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this is a great time to be building, to be acquiring. You want to be in a better position than your competitors, right?
Yeah.
And
executing.
Yeah. My advice to entrepreneurs is that just do what's right for your business. If that means taking a down round, so what? Klarna's done it. Check out a markdown on paper. Quantexa got lucky in RegTech, and they got a flat multiple on the last round. But do what's fundamentally right for your business, because we're going to get out of this. History shows us that things are just going to get better. We're starting to see IPOs. I think those companies that don't have VC backing, maybe just founder-owned, are doing what's right for the business plans. I understand that where you've got institutional capital, that's slightly harder. But I think as hopefully after the next rate rise, as things stabilize, we're going to see a material pickup, because there's dry powder sitting not just in private markets but in public markets. But we want to unlock even more of that through some of the pension reforms.
So there are green shoots coming. I like your positivity. Last but not least, this question, and it has to be asked, given it's such a recent occurrence. We've mentioned SVB and setting up and what's been happening and how it sort of impacted. Russ and myself and a few others were part of that infamous WhatsApp group that weekend, and deeply stressful, but managing to make sure that there was a rescue the Monday morning following the news on the Friday night. I want a reflection from each of you on that, if that's all right. And that, in a way, this will be your final words to the audience. So I'll start with you, Eric, and just go down.
I wanted to hear what everyone else had to say. I will hear what they have to say. So for us, it was an interesting weekend. We did what everyone else did as a VC. We wrote to our portfolio companies, called everybody and said, how's it going? And then I actually went to our bank account and said, who have we actually paid money to? And we've actually settled through SVB. None of the companies that in our current portfolio, we have 2 companies that exited, but none of them in our current portfolio had any exposure to SVB. Our company, we bank at Coots, so we had no exposure to SVB. It's interesting that we invest in underrepresented entrepreneurs in the UK and 0 exposure to SVB. It was like I was living in a parallel universe. And many times I think about that when I'm sitting within the context of the UK fast growth economy, that we seem to be in a very parallel universe. And in that universe, great things are happening, but not a lot of people, maybe some of you are exposed to that. SVB, the big question for me is not that everyone was very happy, everyone heaved a sigh of relief that the governments and companies were saved, and governments and companies saved these institutions. For me, it was great if you had you had your capital that was there, or you had a financial instrument like a venture debt round that was actually there. But what happens to the next group of individuals? I mean, that is an organization, because it had an alternative approach to looking at risk and looked at this market a little bit differently, and now you don't have that institution, or that institution is managed by an organization that didn't necessarily have that same sort of heritage and DNA, what happens to the next group of people who actually need those sorts of services, and particularly those that are a little bit further away from the standard? That is what worries me in terms of SVB. I think there's a big gap in the market, and I don't see another organization that's quite as good at filling that. Again, even though I have zero exposure to SVB at the moment.
Really interesting. Irene,
So
you've
a
worked
couple
very
of
closely with them for a long
reflections.
time.
Yeah, and very much over that weekend as well. Look, a few reflections. Firstly, financial crisis, movements that were put in place there to subsidiarise certain international organisations like SVB meant we could act quickly in the UK to address it. I think the community came together incredibly well, very connected in that regard. And we also had the backup plan that was stepping up and learning from COVID and also using institutions we didn't have back in 2000, which is the British Business Bank and others in coming together. So there's that element that was nimble, agile and worked effectively. The point Eric's making is SVB was playing a role in this marketplace that actually our UK entities have not. This goes back to the point about the knowledge of the growth economy and more of our UK entities stepping up into that. We are seeing movement in a number of the banks, and I think HSBC has closed the gap that it had, whereas Barclays and NatWest and others have been trying to look at filling that. There's a huge opportunity, and we need to see our UK banks and our UK investor pool and the institutions stepping into that and accelerating. And I was listening to a conversation which reminded me of one I had with China and India a few decades ago. What is the difference between China and India? It's democracy. We have to put democracy here on speed to accelerate delivery of our institutional money into this growth capital environment, and that's the opportunity we have ahead of us. It's one that we have to make sure happens quickly and efficiently if we're going to make sure we don't have such exposure as occurred in this last little while. And I know more broadly the banking industry and government is now looking at what is the right tackling for businesses and the amount of money they have in an account and how that can be addressed as well. So that's a couple of points there.
Thank you. Neil?
On SVB, I think the smartest thing that they did was separate the UK from the US, and that UK entity was able to get funding and support from HSBC. I think the proof is going to be in the pudding, but everything we're hearing from HSBC is that they're going to leave that entity alone, let it run, carry on BAU, which is fantastic. Also, just in the venture debt market, there's so many more options that people had 10 years ago. You're not just reliant on Creos and SVB. There are so many others that can help these businesses. So that's good news to our ears.
On a personal level, I felt quite smug because we used to bank with SVB, but about 24 months ago we moved away. On a more serious note, what I took away from it was over the weekend, the response in government. I think, had this happened when Boris was in, would you have got him working over the weekend to ink a deal that late in the morning? That's me speaking personally there, but I don't think so. Whereas
I think Rishi and Jeremy really stepped up
whatever
to the
their
plate.
faults are, they take this industry way more seriously than previous occupiers of that office.
Great. And with that, thank you very much for all of your wonderful insights. I'm sure the four of you are around during the networking break for questions. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all to Bindi, Henry, Irene, Neil and Eric. Thank you so much. Now, really interesting discussion there. I think it's quite easy to be pessimistic given some of those figures that we saw a little earlier, but some real optimism there about what might happen next. Another challenge that we're going to look at right now is the world of net zero, the challenge of how business achieves that over the coming years, particularly, of course, by 2050. Our next panel is going to examine that issue and how the investment community can support clean tech startups and why it's so critical in this field that it gets the capital that it needs to make that goal a reality. So to do that, please welcome our next panel, made up of Avery Johnston, who is Climate Risk and Strategy Associate at KPMG, who's going to moderate the discussion. Joining her are Jan Lozek, who is Managing Partner and Co-founder of the investment firm Future Energy Ventures, Tom Gu, who is General Partner at the venture firm Pact VC, and Buffy Price, Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of climate tech company Carbon Ray. And finally, Dhaval Gore, Partner Communities Director at Globalization Partners. Welcome to you all.
right. Oh, sorry. I don't know if we're going in any order. It's okay.
Just was aligning myself with my foot.
Yeah, I got told yellow chair, so I'll be over here. Those black chair. There we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Avery Johnstone, and I'm an associate at KPMG in their Global Decarbonization Hub, previously with their climate risk and strategy team here in the UK. I am joined by an amazing panel who will all introduce themselves in just one moment to really talk about the intersection of net zero and green tech investment and what that looks like in our kind of current climate. So without further ado, Tong, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm the founding partner at Pax VC. We're the first all-female GP seed fund in the UK. We invest in seed stage companies that basically aim to shape how we can positively live and work in the future. And personally, I'm a technologist by training, and I was an executive founder and also ex-investment banker as well.
Amazing. Buffy.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Buffy, co-founder and CEO at Carbon. We are an AI and climate tech company, so 2 and 3 on that list previously. Phew. So we are on a mission to reduce gigatons of industrial emissions. We're focusing primarily on the cement industry at the moment, which accounts for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We see ourselves as an AI for materials company, so while our first product is a B2B SaaS product on looking at process efficiency and cement production, we're seeing that as the leaping point for us to be able to do what ChatGPT has done for language in terms of AI and material science and teaching it physics and chemistry in a way that has never been done before. So beyond being just SaaS, we're also a very, very ambitious deep tech company.
Amazing. Jan.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Jan. I'm the founder and managing partner of Future Energy Ventures. We are one of the leading firms in Europe investing into what we call the energy transition, which is 70% of the climate technology sector right now. And if you talk about the energy transition, we talk about energy as such, everyone would imagine. We're talking about buildings, and we are talking about the mobility. And everything together is a future energy system. So I'm happy to chat with you about that. And this is our first one. We have invested into North America, Europe, Israel, and a lot of amazing technologies. And I feel like a bit ashamed, but I'm really happy. We're in the climate technology sector. The sector is booming, and it is quite an optimistic view to share with you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Deval from Globalization Partners, now called GP. We are a SaaS-based technology firm, global employment platform. Our solution, our suite of solutions, is helping companies to rapidly hire teams in multiple jurisdictions without having to set up a subsidiary or entity. We own the infrastructure. Our vision, our mission is to create an everywhere workforce. So I guess maybe the reason why I might be here is because of the S on the ESG. We're very much kind of focused on the social and democratizing the kind of talent acquisition and talent exposure, allowing individuals actually who may not have been kind of exposed to traditional businesses and traditional industries around the world to kind of start careers and start working for some fantastic companies that are on our books.
Absolutely.
Lovely to be in here.
And there's a big piece around upskilling that we're going to talk about a little bit later that I think is critical to each one of these points of view, from being in the tech startup space to funding the tech startup space. So we'll touch on that in just a second. But just to kind of set the scene, we know kind of money is pouring into kind of green tech to combat the incredibly large challenge that we have around climate change. And as we kind of scramble to cut emissions, that scramble is really sparking a new kind of wave of innovation, if you will, in the tech space. And government and the private sector are really committed to and have made public commitments around net zero by 2050. But there's no real clear pathway to get there. We've got the Transition Plan Task Force in the UK really creating the kind of blueprint for that, but it's sector agnostic at the minute, and tech really holds this really exciting opportunity to accelerate our transition to net zero. So the demand for new solutions and the demand to scale existing solutions has never been greater, and is really happening at that systems level to create transformational change towards this quite lofty goal for net zero by 2050. But at least in the last decade in the UK, climate tech investment has doubled, and it's happening globally as a result of both regulation and kind of private sector investment, from a market perspective. So the question kind of remains how we're going to scale the capacity to actually accelerate this transition, and if we'll do so in time to avoid kind of mass climate disaster around the world, which we know is already happening. And so I think we also can take a bit of a global north and south lens in that sense, where climate disaster is currently happening all over the world, but perhaps doesn't touch kind of our UK market in the traditional ways that one might think of. So this panel is really focused on that global goal for net zero by 2050 and the investment community's role in kind of accelerating that transition and where we can all be players in this wider conversation. So we just heard from Bindi and kind of her panel really looking at the economic downturn that we're currently facing. And so my first question to my panel today is kind of given that challenging economic environment that we're currently operating in, should we be preparing for kind of a drop in green tech investment? Or are we seeing kind of regulation, particularly things like SFDR and the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, maintaining kind of investors' incentives to maintain their pipelines in green tech? What does that kind of dichotomy or almost juxtaposition look like for your organizations?
I think anecdotally, like what Henry presented earlier from Bohurst, the same with the Atomical State of European Tech report. Clean tech and climate tech's been growing in the past few years, like you said as well. And then also from an investor point of view, we see really a push and pull in the market from consumer side of things. Especially the Gen Z, the millennials are really demanding for more climate or environmentally conscious sort of products and services, whereas regulation is really pushing for companies to produce these with a more sort of positive unit economic incentives. So for us, climate investment is one of our three key pillars, and we don't see that going away anytime soon.
Amazing. And Buffy, from your perspective in the startup space, have you seen that kind of funding accelerate or decelerate in that way?
Certainly, I mean, our clients in the cement world are seeing an existential threat from Europe. We've got the ETS scheme, CBAM, all that's impacting them. For me, I think the regulation's too slow, and even the appetite for clean tech investment. We really shouldn't be talking about net zero by 2050. That is far too late. I mean, Nature released a report in 2021. Really highlighting we've got until 2030. 1 ton saved today is equivalent of 4 tons saved in 2050. Far too late. So we really need to be focusing on scaling existing technologies that can impact and reduce carbon emissions. And I think the regulation is too far behind that. We need to have that urgency, and that's driven by investment, and it's been driven by consumer pressure. So the regulation helps, and it's pushing change, but it's just not fast enough.
Yeah, and your thoughts?
Yeah, good question. So personally, I'm really optimistic about what happens right now. If you look into the last year, $1 trillion have been spent into the energy transition, into everything, renewables, EVs, electrical charging infrastructure, and so on and so forth. If you look at the venture capital market last year, have been spent $70 billion into the market. I think there's a lot of capital available for supporting technology. However, we have a special situation in the capital market. I fully agree and wanted to talk about over it. But I think what's the difference right now in the sector is there's a lot of commercial feasibility. So most of the technologies create financial benefits for investors, for customers right now, and that's why we see a lot of traction. And the market is just to scale. That's one point. And on an investor side, what I see is there's a lot of institutional, mostly sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, from North America, from Europe, stepping in right now into the capital market to financing and focusing capital on the climate technology sector. And for that reasons, I'm really optimistic.
I mean, I'd echo everything that's said. I mean, just from a personal point of view, because I spend a lot of time talking to technology companies, I think scale is absolutely critical here. I mean, and this is a personal take, someone who's a citizen of the world with a family, young kids, scale is important, and trying to make comparisons with other sectors, I think is is a distraction. This is a whole new sector that needs to be pump primed. From our perspective, and going back to what Tom was saying around what's the driving forces from what we're seeing are employees. Right? I think we shouldn't be underestimating the importance of the millennials and the Gen Zers who are going to be dominating the employee landscape for quite some time. From, I think it's about 2035, 60%, 70% of the employee workforce will be made up of millennials and Gen Zers. They have a whole different mindset. They're expecting and almost demanding employers to be environmentally conscious. Otherwise, they're going to walk or they're going to agitate change from within. That's happening globally. We're seeing it, and we're certainly seeing it in the data that we're conducting through surveys. So we shouldn't underestimate that power, whether it's bottom up, and certainly they'll become mid-managers, supervisors, senior leaders at some point very, very soon. And hopefully, I take Jan's point, I'm optimistic from that perspective that change will happen. 2050 is probably way too down the line, but hopefully those individuals start making change soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to build on that, and only out of personal interest, you'll have to forgive me, do we have to wait for millennials and Gen Z to push that change, or can we do it right now? I think we say they as millennials and Gen Z. I very much am a millennial / Gen Z. I'm always not sure which one I fall into. Is that a narrative that we need to shift both from an investment and a startup space, that we're not waiting for change to happen? Buffy, you might have thoughts because you're working kind of in, directly in that space. How can we do this now and not wait for millennials
I'm
and
really
Gen Z?
delighted by the drive for mission-driven work, because we can't match the salaries of Google and Facebook, and so we are able to, because of what we're doing, people are willing to sacrifice massive salaries to come and work for us. Hugely talented people, obviously they get share of equity, and I think that's very attractive as well. But we are able to attract people. It's risky starting working for a startup. You don't know if we're going to get through to the next round, downsize or not. So it's a huge opportunity, not only for skills development and the speed at which we move, but I think we are inundated with requests to come and work for us, and people are really passionate about what we're doing, and I think that is, we're seeing that now.
So we're seeing, just to summarize kind of what we've been talking about so far, we're seeing from an employee perspective, from a consumer perspective. Are we seeing this from an LP perspective as well? Is there a demand for kind of clean tech investment from that level?
Well, actually, we're still mid-fundraising, and we definitely see a lot of LPs more interested in purpose-driven type of VCs overall, specifically in climate tech, probably some more deep tech sort of investments. I see the goodwills there, the family offices, and now especially the younger generation, the new generation, really want to do something good with the business, the money they made in traditional type of industries. I think it's just whether we can educate them fast enough to really put the money where their mouth is.
Yeah, and we're kind of skipping across some of the questions that I sent in advance because I think this builds really nicely. But one of the key challenges that I think we're very much facing as we start and scale a lot of these businesses really is that piece of upskilling. And it's not just we have a lot of very senior kind of investment professionals who have tenured experience in investing, and you have a lot of really young professionals who are either have technical climate backgrounds because they've done master's and PhD programs in climate, which are all new academic programs, but they also have a real appetite for impact, as we've just discussed. Where's that point around upskilling investment teams, upskilling boards of directors, LPs, and executive kind of committees in being able to recognize kind of climate risk and climate opportunity as just business as usual process as part of due diligence, risk, strategy? Who does that sit with?
I mean, that's kind of pointing towards the chief sustainability officer role, right? I mean, and it's something that we're certainly tracking from our side. We're placing a lot of folks with sustainability in their job titles, but it's such a new emerging role. In fact, I did a quick check on LinkedIn. I think I'm myself connected to 21,000 people on LinkedIn, second and third connections, which has got sustainability in their job title, which I think, and that's just me alone. I mean, if you multiply it across the room, that's a lot of people with that job title, that mandate. And this is not me poo-pooing that role. It just goes back to the question you're asking. The role exists. All roads should lead to that person. That person should have the mandate to be able to have or should be reporting directly into the chief executive office's office, be sat at the decision-making table, but they're not yet. And I think the problem seems to be, it's almost akin to the chief innovation officer that started 10, 15 years ago. And I think, it's been around like I have, those poor folks that started those roles, scratching their heads as to who they are, what they do, and who they report into. That's now changed. But we need to speed it up when it comes to the chief sustainability officer role, because we don't really have much time. That person needs to have the mandate and responsibility and accountability ASAP, and the team and the wherefore to be able to kind of deliver on, and then provide metrics, and then provide the sort of informed data that then decision makers like themselves need to start acting on.
Yeah, and your thoughts?
A bit of personal note on my side. So I think we are all chief sustainable officers, isn't it? And that's on a private and on a professional notion. And our business, it's like that we learn from the younger ones, which are coming in with a lot of passion, with ideas how to solve the world and what could be the right technologies, and we're helping them to understand how investment works, how to connect, how to evaluate the deals, and so on and so forth. And collectively, we are becoming chief sustainable officers in our firm, and we have a person which is responsible for the approach. Don't get me wrong. Now, that's not my point. And the second point is much more, even more important. At home, having the same discussion with my kids now, 22 and 20, pushing for sustainability. At home, we have ourselves a huge responsibility to be chief sustainable officer, which means buying the PV, buying a car, electrical car, or just leaving the car aside and taking the public transport, and so on and so forth. So I think there are two sides, and I'm just reconnecting with your remark. It's about us, it's about now. It's the older, the younger, it's all together. It's a business, it's a family, it's a friendship, a cycle, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as a VC investor, we can't stop thinking about succession in the sense that we can't believe that in 20-year time, I'm still really relevant to what's the latest trend, and even in 10-year time. So we're always conscious of that, even though we're just a new fund. So what we're doing is basically we have this internship program where we have students from MBA universities and undergrad come and join us specifically on the topics we invest in. So like financial inclusion, like climate tech. We want to hear, like Jan's point, how the younger generation, I'm a millennial, but I want to hear people from universities, what's their view, what's their demand on the companies we're looking at, and often we get very valuable inputs. So this is from human side, but also you need to set up a framework as an investor to make sure we invest in companies, managing companies that can follow through what they promise they'll do. So we basically start from the point of investing, we put the goals in the term sheet, we also then track what they've been making impacts on over the time of investment. So it's not just talking or one person trying to take that role, but really systematically tracking the company over time.
Exactly, and I think that's what I've seen a lot of, getting a lot of traction in my work as well, is actually how do you enable every person within an organization, Jan, to your point, to take ownership over sustainability, take ownership on the ESG goals. Yeah. So it doesn't just sit with a chief sustainability officer, which ultimately, manages the strategy or the budget or, the kind of C-suite side of it, but really how do we empower and integrate, this kind of investment model into all of our funds, all of our work, and how do we look at that in a much more holistic way?
Yeah, I recently saw a B2B startup quite early on. They basically empower all the employees within the company to contribute to the sustainability goals of the enterprises. I think we'll see more of that.
Yeah, because it just reminded me, there's a couple of stats I'm familiar with. It's like 60%, 65% of individuals, particularly on the younger side of things, who walk out of the door if they don't feel like their employers are taking sustainability and environmental values seriously. But equally, almost a similar number don't feel like they're empowered to be able to contribute to that agenda. So I completely agree. I mean, I think the Chief Sustainable Officer role is there to kind of provide the framework for everyone to contribute, right? Whether it's top down, bottom up, and it needs to be both. I mean, we're talking about driving behaviors here. I mean, just from my side and at GP, we're very much part of that global workforce and very much actually part of the remote workforce. And that conjures up a whole host of new dynamics around climate change and net zero, particularly around the use of buildings. So yeah, these things need to be driven both by the individuals. Back to Jan's point, we're all chief sustainable officers, all of us in this room, from top down as well, in terms of providing those clear policies and perhaps even kind of the frameworks. A lot of people don't know where to turn, how to make those small changes. So there's a lot of education that's probably required to kind of provided by the employers if that's the values that they want to instill in their organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And equally, if those are the values they want to instill in their portfolio, right? So it's investing in companies like, Buffy's that are actually really doing this work on the, forefront and making climate, working in climate action in that context.
Yeah, and it's interesting to say that. So both our seed round we closed in October last year, that is led by Planet A, so Impact Investor. Our pre-seed was led by Clean Growth Fund. So we found investors that really did get it at core. It wasn't just a nice to have. And female co-founder, my CEO is Egyptian, so we're ticking all the boxes. But still, there wasn't that real understanding. And then the other piece around upskilling, from an investor point of view, is really understanding technology. Sort of artificial intelligence, it's such a broad and nebulous term. When we're saying we're doing deep reinforcement learning, what does that mean if you don't understand machine learning and data science and all those pieces? It's a huge holistic learning curve for everybody. And it can't be just a nice to have on the side. It has to be something you're going to do at core and commit to.
Yeah. I'm conscious we're at time, and just to kind of briefly summarize what we've discussed, we're seeing the kind of need for this investment coming from all different angles. And we need everyone along the journey at all ages and all stages of their careers to be able to engage in this kind of conversation around sustainability, and upskilling our teams is going to be quite critical. Have I missed anything?
And we have to do it now.
And we have to do it now. The urgency is there, definitely. Thank you all so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being with us. Time for a really quick break. If you're at home, you've got to put the kettle on yourself. Everybody else in the room, there's tea, coffee, and we'll meet back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Hello everyone, if you wouldn't mind making your way back into the main room, we'll start on the second set of sessions for the rest of the morning. If you want to make your way back in here, please. Hi everyone, if you wouldn't mind making your way back to the front of the room, we'll get underway with the next of our panel sessions this morning. Thank you. Hi folks, if you wouldn't mind making your way back to the front of the room, Russ will come and get you if you don't. So please make your way back to the front of the room. Russ is on the prowl.